Imagine stepping off a plane, right? You're in a completely new country, and you make this simple, friendly little hand gesture to signal to your host that, everything is going great.
Oh, yeah.
And without realizing it, you've just accidentally told them they are a complete zero. Or, I mean, worse, you accidentally start a bar fight over a misunderstanding you didn't even know you created.
Right. Yeah. It happens far more often than we like to admit. I mean, we spend our entire lives navigating this massive complex structure of spoken words and silent physical signals.
Yeah.
But because we're so immersed in it literally from birth, we usually have absolutely no idea we're even doing it. It's like uh, an architecture made entirely of thin air.
Exactly. And today we are bringing that invisible architecture into the light. So welcome to the deep dive. We're looking at a really fascinating stack of research today, diving deep into the mechanics of intercultural communication.
Just a great topic.
It really is. And our mission for you, listening right now, is to decode this hidden framework of human connection. We are going to explore how the words you speak and the subtle, silent things your body shouts without your permission literally shape your reality, define your identity, and dictate how you navigate a heavily globalized world. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
To understand how something as massive as language controls us, we really need to look at how it's built from the ground up, right?
Yeah, we have to start at the molecular level, basically. If you break language down into its fundamental building blocks, linguists usually divide it into 5 interconnected components.
Okay, 5 components.
Right. So at the very bottom, you have phonology. This is simply the organization of raw sound. The smallest possible unit of sound is called a foam.
So we're talking about the literal noises we force through our vocal cords, like a click, a hiss, an ow sound, that kind of thing.
Exactly. And out of all the possible noises a human mouth can make, any given language only uses a very small, specific menu of them. Then, once you have those sounds, you move up a level to morphology. This is where you take those raw sounds and combine them into basic units of meaning, which are called morphemes, to create words.
It's kind of like Lego bricks.
Yeah. Perfect analogy.
Like if you take the word unhappy, you are basically snapping 2 bricks together. Happy brings the core meaning of feeling cheerful, and then the prefix un acts as a modifier to mean the exact opposite.
Spot on. But having a pile of Lego bricks doesn't mean you have a house.
Right. Just a mess on the floor.
Exactly. So that brings us to the third level, which is syntax. Syntax is the invisible math of a language. It's the grammatical rules for how we sequence those specific words into actual sentences.
Okay, so sounds, words, and then the grammar to organize them.
Right. And once you have that structure, you arrive at the 4th component, semantics, which is the actual meaning we derive from that specific sequence of words.
So sounds, words, grammar, and meaning. I mean, that seems like a totally complete system. We're done, right?
You'd think so. But there is a 5th component. And this one seems to be where all the actual real-world trouble starts.
Oh, of course. There's always a catch.
Always. That 5th component would be pragmatics. Pragmatics dictates how language is used in a specific social context.
Okay, social context.
Yeah, you can have the sounds, the words, the grammar, and the meaning mathematically perfect, but if you get the pragmatics wrong, the communication completely breaks down.
Okay, let's ground this in a real scenario so people can picture it. If you look at how different cultures handle, say, conflict resolution, the pragmatics change wildly.
Oh, massively.
Like in Germany, a highly direct communication style is really valued. If there's a problem with the project, the social expectation is to just state the problem clearly, bluntly, and immediately.
Yeah, right to the point.
Right. But in South Korea, preserving group harmony and saving face is the absolute priority. So a much more indirect, nuanced approach is favored.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is what happens when those two styles collide. If a German executive walks into a boardroom in Seoul and uses a German pragmatic approach, like speaking bluntly and forcefully, even if their Korean translation is flawlessly grammatical, the interaction is going to fail.
Because the social rules are entirely different.
Exactly. The Korean executives might view the German as aggressive or unrefined, while the German might view the Korean executives as, evasive or inefficient.
Yeah.
The friction isn't in the vocabulary, it's in the hidden social rules governing the vocabulary.
Which brings up something incredibly strange about how this whole system works, because the core connection between the words we use and the physical world around us is totally arbitrary.
Completely made up.
Yeah. There is this foundational concept in structural linguistics pointing out that the link between a word and the object it represents doesn't actually exist in nature.
Right, going back to Ferdinand de Saussure, there is absolutely no natural biological law tying a four-legged milk-producing farm animal to the sound cow.
None at all.
We just collectively agree to make that specific mouth noise when we see that animal.
Right.
In France, they make the mouth noise vache. In Spain, it's vaca. The word is just an arbitrary signifier for a physical signified object.
But if the words themselves are just made-up conventions, how do our brains process them so effortlessly? I mean, kids just soak this stuff up.
Well, this is where Noam Chomsky's theory enters the picture, and it completely shifted how we view the human brain. He argues for the existence of a universal grammar.
Universal grammar. Okay, break that down.
So, the nativist school of linguistics suggests that humans are biologically pre-programmed for language structure. We don't just learn language purely by mimicking our parents.
Right, like a parrot.
Exactly,
Yeah,
not like a
yeah.
parrot. Our brains come out of the box equipped with an innate foundational understanding of syntax. When a toddler is exposed to their surrounding language, it triggers these pre-programmed models.
So if Chomsky is right, language is essentially a biological smartphone operating system we're all born with. And the specific language we end up speaking, like English, Swahili, Hindi, is just the local app we download to run on that universal OS.
Yes, that is a great way to put it. And that universal operating system is what gives humans generative grammar.
Generative grammar.
Because we intuitively understand the underlying code of how language works, we aren't limited to a phrase book of sentences we've just memorized. You can generate an infinite number of completely original sentences that have never been spoken before in the history of the universe, and I will understand you instantly.
Okay, but that raises a massive question. If my language is an app I download from my culture, does that specific app change how my brain actually processes reality?
Now we're getting to the heavy stuff.
Right, like if you and I download different language apps, do we literally see the world differently?
You are touching on one of the most fiercely debated ideas in linguistics. It's known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. It proposes that language and thought are inextricably tied together.
Okay.
The philosopher Martin Heidegger famously suggested that humans act as though we are the masters of language, when in fact, language is the master of us.
Wow. Okay, but how does that actually play out in real life? Because it sounds a bit, abstract.
Sure. Consider how different languages segment the natural world. A classic example is the Inuit languages, which contain plentiful and highly specific words for different types of snow.
Like falling snow versus snow on the ground?
Exactly. Falling snow, wet snow, crusty snow. Because their language cuts up and categorizes that aspect of nature so finely, it's argued that they literally perceive their snowy environment with a higher resolution than someone who just has the single catch-all word snow.
Okay, I see that. Actually, we see this happen in professional subcultures all the time. Think about medical students or law students.
Oh, absolutely.
They spend years learning these massive, highly specialized vocabularies. And learning those words literally alters their perception. A doctor doesn't just see a bruise, right? They see a very specific, localized hematoma with defined characteristics because they have the vocabulary to mentally categorize it.
Yes. Or think of a sommelier tasting wine. They have 50 different words for earthy, which fundamentally changes how their taste buds report data to their brain.
So language draws the boundaries of our reality.
It does, but it also draws the boundaries of our tribes. It is the ultimate tool for building and preserving identity.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Look at how nations use language to solidify who they are. When Israel became an independent state, reinstating Hebrew, which was primarily a liturgical language at the time, and making it the national tongue, was a powerful way to mark the new nation as distinctive and unified.
Or like Ireland making Gaelic a required subject in schools. It's a way to preserve a cultural boundary against the historical dominance of English.
Precisely. And it happens in the subcultural level, too. There's a concept called ethno-linguistic vitality.
Ethno-linguistic vitality.
Yeah, it measures the degree of prestige and importance attached to a group's language or dialect. If your dialect is constantly mocked or disparaged by the majority culture, it can severely impact your confidence and your sense of identity.
Because rejecting someone's language is fundamentally rejecting them.
Exactly. It's deeply personal.
There's actually a heartbreaking story in the research that perfectly illustrates the emotional weight of this.
Oh, the broadcasting student.
Yes. So a student from a very rural, isolated part of the United States goes off to a large university to study broadcasting. And his professors tell him his rural accent is entirely unacceptable for television.
Just completely dismissive.
Yeah. So he spends months aggressively training himself to speak with a flat, standard American news anchor accent, and he succeeds. But when he goes back home for Thanksgiving and knocks on the front door, his own mother refuses to let him inside the house.
It's so sad.
She doesn't recognize his voice, and she tells him he cannot come in until he talks right.
It's a devastating example of language as a tribal marker. When he changed his pronunciation to fit the university's in-group, he inadvertently signaled to his mother that he had abandoned her in-group.
Yeah.
The friction wasn't about him being difficult to understand. It was entirely about loyalty.
Okay, but I need to push back on the core premise of the Sapir-Whorf theory for a second.
Okay, go for it.
If the strong version of this hypothesis claims that language completely determines our thought, I mean, doesn't that mean we are literally trapped inside our own dictionaries? How would anyone ever invent a new concept or imagine something entirely novel if they didn't already have the word for it?
That logical trap is exactly why modern linguists generally reject the strong version of the hypothesis, which is called linguistic determinism.
Okay, so they don't buy the strong version.
Right. If language strictly determined thought, translating a novel from Russian to English would be completely impossible, and human innovation would essentially just freeze.
Because you couldn't think outside the bounds of your existing vocabulary.
Exactly. Instead, most scholars accept the weak version, known as linguistic relativity. This argues that your native language heavily influences and categorizes your experience, but it does not imprison you.
Okay, that's an important distinction.
You can absolutely learn new, foreign concepts. It just might take you a bit more cognitive effort to grasp a nuance that your native language doesn't have a specific, ready-made label for.
So it's an influence, not a prison. And if you're navigating a global workspace, realizing how your own vocabulary might be creating blind spots is a massive advantage. You are seeing reality through the lens of your specific dictionary, and your colleagues might be looking through a completely different lens.
And as powerful as spoken words are as shaping our reality, they are only a fraction of the story.
Right. We've spent all this time on the verbal operating system. Here's where it gets really interesting. What if the most powerful cultural code doesn't use words at all? Let's look at the silent signals that constantly override our vocabularies.
We are entering the realm of nonverbal communication. The researcher Albert Moravian famously estimated that 93% of the emotional meaning in a message is carried through nonverbal channels.
Wait, 93%?
Yeah, 93% like voice tone, facial expressions, and posture, while only 7% is carried by the actual words.
Okay, even if the scientific community debates the exact math of those percentages, the underlying reality is undeniable. Nonverbal communication is the heavyweight champion of human interaction. But how does it fundamentally differ from the spoken words we just analyzed?
The crucial difference comes down to the distinction between symbols and signs. Remember, verbal language is entirely based on symbols.
Right, arbitrarily made up.
Exactly. They're conscious, arbitrary, and literal. The word apple is a made-up symbol. Nonverbal communication, however, relies heavily on signs.
Signs.
Signs are often involuntary, and they are tied directly to our nervous systems and our emotional states.
Blushing is the perfect example of a sign.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you usually cannot force yourself to blush on command. And it is almost impossible to stop it from happening when you are genuinely embarrassed. It's an autonomic biological response, not an arbitrary symbol you chose to use.
And because nonverbal cues are so deeply tied to our biology and are often involuntary, human beings have evolved this deep-seated bias.
Which is?
When someone's words say one thing but their body language says another, when the verbal and the nonverbal contradicts, we almost universally believe the nonverbal message. We perceive the physical sign as the truthful leak of their real emotion.
Okay, think of it like this for everyone listening. If verbal communication is just the plain text of an email, then nonverbal communication is the font, the bolding, the emojis, and the speed at which you hit reply.
I love that.
If the text says, "I'm fine," but it is typed in all CPS, we believe the all caps. The all caps is the truth.
That analogy perfectly captures how these parallel systems interact. And researchers categorize how these all caps function in our daily lives. There are basically 6 functions.
Let's hear them.
Sometimes they substitute for words entirely, like a police officer holding up a flat hand to stop traffic. Other times they complement a message, adding emotional depth, like a parent putting a finger to their lips while whispering to a child.
Or they accentuate a message, like pounding your fist on a table while saying no makes a no infinitely heavier.
Exactly. They can also contradict the verbal message, as we discussed, and they repeat verbal messages, like pointing left while saying turn left. Finally, they regulate the entire flow of our conversations.
Regulate. How so?
Well, without realizing it, we use tiny shifts in eye contact, pauses, and breath to signal whose turn it is to speak.
But wait, if things like blushing and crying are tied to our biology, are nonverbal cues the same everywhere? Or do they change based on geography?
That is the ultimate paradox of the silent language. The underlying core emotions, fear, happiness, anger, sadness,
Yeah.
those appear to be biologically universal. A genuine smile of joy involves the exact same facial muscles in New York as it does in Tokyo. However, the display rules, the cultural permission slips that dictate when, where, and how intensely it's appropriate to show those emotions, those are entirely conditioned by your environment.
So the feeling is universal, but the volume nod is controlled by your culture.
Beautifully said.
Hmm.
Take the expression of grief. In many Middle Eastern cultures, the display rules dictate that grief should be expressed very openly, loudly, and communally. It's an outward sign of respect for the deceased.
Right.
But in many Indonesian cultures, the display rules demand a much more subdued, quiet, and internalized mourning behavior. The biological emotion of sadness is identical. The cultural formatting is miles apart.
Since we rely so heavily on the all caps of nonverbal cues to find the truth in an interaction, how do different cultures format their specific silent messages? Because it seems like a gesture that means peace in one country could easily start a war in another.
This raises an important question, and it brings us to kinesics, which is the study of body movement and gestures. A major subcategory of kinesics is emblems.
Emblems.
Yeah, emblems are gestures that have a direct, literal dictionary translation within a specific culture.
Like the classic American OK sign, the index finger and thumb making a circle.
Exactly. It means everything is good in the U.S.
Mm.
But if you take that exact same emblem to Japan, it translates to money.
Really? Yeah.
And if you use it in Indonesia or France, it often means zero or worthless. So you're broadcasting a completely different concept than you intend.
That is wild. And then you have illustrators, right? Which are movements that complement the words, like holding your hands far apart to show how big a fish you caught.
Yes.
There's actually a wild anecdote in the research about illustrators causing chaos. An American tourist was visiting Mexico, and he was trying to tell some locals how tall his children were. So he held his hand out flat, horizontally, parallel to the ground, at about waist height.
Which is completely standard in North America.
Right. But the locals were completely baffled. They were looking around for animals.
Oh, no.
Yeah. It turns out, in Mexico, that specific flat horizontal hand gesture is exclusively used to indicate the height of an animal, like a dog or a farm animal.
That's hilarious.
To show the height of a human being, you have to hold your hand vertically with the edge of your palm facing the ground. By using his native illustrator, he was accidentally telling them he had a pack of waist-high children running around.
It's a funny misunderstanding, but it perfectly highlights how easily we create confusion without uttering a single syllable. And the invisible architecture extends way beyond our hands. Consider paralanguage.
Paralanguage. Okay, what's that?
That encompasses all the vocal qualities that accompany speech. Pitch, tempo, volume. The volume of your voice carries completely different meanings depending on your cultural operating system.
Volume isn't just about hearing the words, it's an emotional broadcast.
Exactly. Speaking loudly indicates strength and sincerity to many Arab cultures. It indicates authority and confidence to Germans. But to Thais, speaking loudly is considered incredibly impolite and aggressive. And to the Japanese, raising your voice often indicates a frightening loss of emotional control.
Wow. So you could be speaking loudly in Tokyo to show how confident and authoritative you are, and people across the table are looking at you thinking you're having a total mental breakdown.
Exactly.
What about physical space and touch? Because I know that varies a lot.
The study of touch is called haptics, and it is deeply cultural. North America and Northern Europe are generally low-touch cultures. Touching is heavily policed and usually reserved for intimacy or highly formalized greetings like a handshake.
Right.
But Mediterranean and Latin American cultures are high touch. They rely heavily on incidental touch during casual conversation to show engagement, warmth, and trust.
So if a Mediterranean colleague touches a North American's arm to emphasize a point and show friendliness, the North American might physically recoil. They might read it as an aggressive invasion of personal space or, inappropriate intimacy.
Exactly. The intent is friendly, but the interpretation is hostile. And there's one more specific example regarding gestures that perfectly encapsulates how completely arbitrary our silent language is. It involves pulling down your lower eyelid with your index finger.
Okay, in English or French culture, if you pull down your lower eyelid, it usually means my eye, as in, I don't believe a word you're saying. It's a sarcastic sign of disbelief.
Right, but if you make that exact same physical motion in Farsi, where the gesture is called chashim, it means, I promise.
Are you serious?
Yes. It signifies that you are offering your eye as a guarantee. You literally go from calling someone a liar to making a solemn, honorable vow just by crossing a geographic border.
That is unbelievable. So if there is no physical printed dictionary for these nonverbal codes and they change wildly from place to place, how on earth are we supposed to navigate the world without constantly offending each other?
The most important realization is that nonverbal rules operate almost entirely in our subconscious. We only ever notice them when somebody breaks our specific local rules.
Yeah, they become suddenly very visible.
Right, so to achieve true intercultural competence, the goal isn't to sit down and memorize a flashcard deck of every hand gesture and vocal inflection in the world. That's cognitively impossible.
You can't download every app.
Exactly. The real goal is to cultivate a deep, active awareness that your own normal is entirely subjective. It is a fabricated system.
So when someone from another culture behaves in a way that feels rude, evasive, or just bizarre, you have to hit pause on your immediate emotional reaction.
Yes, hit pause. And you have to ask yourself, are they actually being rude? Or are they just operating on a different set of pragmatic rules and cultural display codes than I am?
You have to stop assuming that your local app is the universal operating system.
The friction is almost always in the formatting, not the intent.
We have covered incredible ground today.
Yeah.
We started at the literal microscopic level of a single foam, an arbitrary sound bouncing around the vocal cords, and traveled all the way up through the complex grammar of how language literally shapes our perception of snow, medicine, and even our own family members.
It's a huge journey.
It really is. We unpacked the silent, culturally loaded promise of pulling down an eyelid, and why the all-key PS of our body language will always overpower the plain text of our vocabulary. It really is an invisible architecture, and the more we can actively perceive it, the less likely we are to bump our heads against the walls.
But exploring all of this leaves us with a truly fascinating puzzle regarding the future.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if our spoken languages and our silent physical codes are so deeply programmed by our localized physical environments, what happens now?
What do you mean?
As globalization forces all of us, from all over the world, into the exact same digital spaces, the same video calls, the same text threads, the same social media platforms, are we inevitably moving toward a single, universal human language of homogenized emojis and standardized digital cues?
That is a wild thought. Or will our subtle, deeply ingrained cultural differences simply find new, invisible ways to clash in the comments section? That is something to chew on the next time you draft an email, use an emoji, or jump on a global video call. You might be broadcasting in a completely different language than you think. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious out there.